C.S. Lewis, a literary titan and theological scholar, is perhaps best known for his works of fiction, like the Chronicles of Narnia, and his deeply profound explorations of Christian apologetics. His writings consistently exhibit a deep understanding of human nature, particularly in relation to moral and spiritual concerns. While Lewis did not directly write about modern psychological concepts like narcissism, his insights into pride, selfishness, and the corrupting effects of sin provide a rich framework for understanding this complex personality disorder. By examining Lewis' views on pride and self-centeredness, we can uncover surprising truths about narcissism, which are still relevant in today's culture. Lewis' most notable reflections on the subject come from his seminal work, Mere Christianity. In one of its chapters, titled The Great Sin, he offers what is perhaps his most comprehensive critique of pride, calling it the essential vice, the utmost evil. According to Lewis, pride leads to every other vice, and it is the sin that leads individuals to pit themselves against others, constantly comparing and seeking superiority. Here, we see the seeds of what modern psychology now labels as narcissism, an excessive preoccupation with self, an insatiable thirst for validation, and an unwillingness to empathize with others. When we look at narcissism today, we often think of it as a clinical term, tied to the psychological disorder known as narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. This disorder is characterized by traits such as grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. These characteristics, when examined through Lewis' lens, closely resemble the descriptions of pride he warned against. In essence, what Lewis described as spiritual pride or arrogance is deeply intertwined with the concept of narcissism as we understand it today. One of the most striking parallels between Lewis' critique of pride and modern understandings of narcissism is the way both lead to isolation. Narcissists, despite their outward bravado and self-assuredness, often end up alienating themselves from others. Their inability to empathize and their constant need for validation prevent them from forming genuine, meaningful relationships. Similarly, Lewis argues that pride always means enmity, not only between individuals but between an individual and God. For Lewis, pride is the sin that distances us from others and from the divine, as it places the self at the center of existence. Narcissists, too, place themselves at the center of everything, expecting the world to revolve around their desires, needs, and ambitions. They view others as mere extensions of their own egos, tools to be used in the pursuit of validation and admiration. This egocentrism blinds them to the reality that they are, in fact, deeply dependent on others. Lewis' reflections on pride offer a spiritual diagnosis that parallels this psychological reality. Pride, he says, is competitive by its very nature. It thrives on superiority over others. It's not enough for the narcissist to be admired, they must be admired more than anyone else. This competitiveness, Lewis argues, is the core of pride, and it mirrors the toxic dynamics found in narcissistic relationships. The narcissist, like the prideful individual Lewis describes, is never satisfied. No amount of praise or admiration is enough, and this endless quest for validation leaves them hollow. Lewis speaks to this hunger in the Screwtape Letters, where the demonic character Screwtape instructs his apprentice on how to tempt humans by appealing to their pride and vanity. Screwtape reveals that no matter how much a person gains through their pride, they will never be content. This is the narcissist's dilemma. They are trapped in an endless loop of seeking approval, but no amount of external affirmation will fill the internal void they carry. While modern psychology offers treatments like therapy and counseling to help individuals with narcissistic tendencies, Lewis' work provides a different perspective, that the antidote to pride, and by extension, narcissism, is humility. Humility, as Lewis defines it, is not thinking less of oneself, but thinking of oneself less. This is a crucial distinction, as many misunderstand humility to mean self-deprecation or low self-esteem. In reality, true humility involves recognizing one's place in the world, understanding that we are not the center of the universe, and being able to look beyond ourselves to the needs of others. This emphasis on humility as a remedy for pride aligns closely with modern therapeutic approaches to treating narcissism. Many psychologists argue that developing empathy and learning to consider others' perspectives is key to helping narcissists break free from their self-centered patterns of thought. Similarly, Lewis argues that the path to spiritual growth and healing lies in learning to see oneself as part of a larger whole, rather than the central figure in life's narrative. But Lewis goes further than simply diagnosing the problem of pride and offering a solution. He also speaks to the seductive nature of pride, which is perhaps one of the most surprising truths about narcissism. For Lewis, pride is not only dangerous but deeply attractive. It appeals to our desire for autonomy, for self-sufficiency, and for control. It whispers to us that we don't need anyone else, that we are better off relying solely on ourselves. This allure is what makes pride, and by extension, narcissism, so difficult to combat. It feeds into our deepest insecurities, offering a false sense of superiority and power that temporarily masks our vulnerabilities. Narcissism operates in much the same way. At its core, it is a defense mechanism, a way of protecting oneself from feelings of inadequacy, shame, or fear. The narcissist builds a fortress of self-aggrandizement to protect themselves from the pain of vulnerability. But, as Lewis points out, this fortress eventually becomes a prison. The more we isolate ourselves in our pride, the further we distance ourselves from genuine connection, love, and growth. Narcissists, in their quest to protect themselves, end up cutting themselves off from the very relationships and experiences that could lead to healing and wholeness. Another surprising truth about narcissism that we can glean from Lewis' reflections is the way it distorts reality. Narcissists, like the prideful individuals Lewis describes, live in a world of illusion. They construct an image of themselves that is larger than life, but this image is fragile, constantly threatened by the realities of their own limitations and weaknesses. Lewis describes pride as the mother of all lies, because it convinces us that we are something we are not. This self-deception is central to narcissism. Narcissists often have an inflated sense of their own abilities and importance, but this grandiosity is built on shaky ground. The slightest criticism or failure can send them spiraling into rage or despair because it threatens the carefully crafted facade they have built. In The Great Divorce, Lewis explores the idea that our choices shape the kind of person we become. Those who choose pride over humility, selfishness over love, ultimately become less human, more isolated, and more miserable. This echoes the fate of the narcissist who, over time, becomes increasingly cut off from others, trapped in a cycle of self-obsession that leads to loneliness and despair. For Lewis, the path to true joy and fulfillment lies in breaking free from this cycle, in learning to look outward rather than inward, and in recognizing that we are part of a larger, interconnected whole. One of the most profound aspects of Lewis' writing on pride is his insistence that it is ultimately self-defeating. Pride, he argues, is a poison that destroys the very thing it seeks to protect, the self. This is perhaps the greatest irony of narcissism as well. The narcissist, in their quest for admiration and validation, ends up alienating the very people whose approval they so desperately seek. Their relationships are shallow, their achievements feel hollow, and their sense of self-worth is constantly under siege. However, Lewis also offers a message of hope. While pride is a formidable adversary, it is not invincible. Humility, love, and grace can break the chains of narcissism, leading to a life of genuine connection, fulfillment, and joy. Lewis' reflections remind us that while the path to healing may be difficult, it is possible. It requires a willingness to confront our own shortcomings, to let go of the need for constant validation, and to embrace a life of service and empathy. In conclusion, while C.S. Lewis did not explicitly write about narcissism as a psychological disorder, his profound insights into the nature of pride offer valuable lessons for understanding and addressing narcissistic behavior. His writings expose the dangers of self-centeredness, the isolation it brings, and the ultimate emptiness of a life lived in pursuit of admiration. But more importantly, he offers a path to healing, a path rooted in humility, love, and the recognition that true fulfillment comes not from elevating the self, but from serving others. In this way, Lewis' timeless wisdom speaks directly to the heart of the narcissistic struggle, offering hope for those trapped in its grip and a reminder that we are all, in the end, part of something greater than ourselves.
Hey, people who support empowering yourself. You may be wondering what narcissists do when you finally get away from them. It's not just about returning your power when you break up with a narcissist. It's also about realizing how it will affect them. Leave a comment below if you've ever taken steps to get your life back from bad situations. Let's inspire each other. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. We're going to talk about the mental, emotional, and physical effects on a narcissist when you shut yourself off from their life today. There is more to this path than just your own healing. It has to do with figuring out how things work and how narcissists react when they lose their source of approval. Stay tuned as we talk about these lessons and how walking away can change your life. Share, like, and encourage each other as we work to get our power and freedom back. 1. Knowing how ego reinforcement works. To understand what happens when you break up with someone who is focused on themselves, you need to understand the idea of ego reward. Ego reinforcement means giving egocentric people constant praise, respect, and attention in order to keep up their inflated sense of self-worth and fragile sense of importance. The people in their group give them this support, and they manipulate and influence others to make sure they get a steady flow of attention and admiration. When someone who gives ego-boosting sources, like a love partner, close friend, or family member, leaves, it can be very upsetting for the egocentric person. 2. The first response of the self-centered person. A. Surprise and decline. When you leave an egocentric person for the first time, they usually respond with surprise and denial. People who are egocentric have an inflated sense of how important they are and think they are necessary. People can't understand why someone would leave them, which can lead to a state of denial. They might not want to believe that the relationship is over and act like nothing has changed, trying to keep things the same. B. Outburst and fury. These people often lose it when they have to face reality and react with rants and anger. They are reacting this way because they can't change the situation and they are very afraid of being left alone. The egocentric person's anger can show up in many ways, such as verbal attacks, threats, or attempts to hurt your image. This stage is marked by the egocentric person's desperate efforts to regain control and dominance. C. Tries to get involved again. People who are focused on themselves use re-engagement to get their victims back into the relationship. This could be done through manipulation, claims to change, or even acting like you're weak when you're not. The egocentric person may send you a lot of texts, call you a lot, or show up at your house without warning to try to get you to fall back into their cycle of manipulation. People re-engage because they want to find a source of encouragement and feel in charge again. 3. The effects on a person's mind and feelings when they are self-centered. Erster Ego-Schock. When a main source of ego support leaves, it can cause a deep ego shock. This word refers to the intense emotional pain and sensitivity that egocentric people feel when their self-image and sense of self-worth are threatened. The shock can make people feel ashamed, inadequate, and deeply uneasy. For someone who is egotistical, this shock is often too much to handle, and they act defensively to protect their low self-esteem. B. Need for alternative reinforcement right away. When egocentric people experience an ego shock, they immediately look for other sources of support. To fill the void left by your departure, they may quickly move on to a new relationship, friendship, or business connection. This sense of urgency can make the egocentric person act in dangerous and rash ways as they try to regain their sense of importance and power.